Hello, I'm Dr. Greg Mock, and I am in the History PhD program here at Liberty University. My undergraduate majors were biology and chemistry with a minor in mathematics. I went on to veterinary school at the University of Illinois and graduated from there in 1986 with a Doctor of Veterinary Medicine degree. I practiced for 35 years. My main focus was internal medicine, but I did a lot of surgery too, about 30,000 surgical procedures over the years. So I retired at the end of 2021 and began my master's classes in the spring of 2022 here at Liberty University and received a Master of Arts in history in the spring of 2024. My thesis subject was the geopolitical maneuvers of the German Empire prior to World War I. So, my subject for this course was the demand for unconditional surrender of the Axis powers made by the Allied powers in World War II. So, that demand was made public at the news conference at the end of the Casablanca conference in January of 1943 between Franklin Roosevelt and Winston Churchill and their chiefs of staff to develop military plans for the next year. So during the news conference, Roosevelt supposedly accidentally um, spouted out and said something about the unconditional surrender they were going to be demanding. Now, there was an agreement before that not to mention it at that time. So my paper disputes this so called accidental slip of the tongue by Roosevelt and says that this was an actual purposeful thing that he did. And so the question is, why did he do that? And basically, everybody that's looked at this does agree with that. They also have concluded that by demanding unconditional surrender, the war was probably lengthened by a year and millions more lives, civilian and military, were lost as a result of it. So why did he do it? So there's a lot of controversy why he would have said that. So my paper looks at that situation. And so what I've concluded is that he did it purposefully, but he did it purposefully for some very bad reasons. So how he went about things was first reading a lot of secondary sources in order to get kind of a lay of the land and understand what was going on and what the controversy is. Now, those secondary sources led me to lots of primary sources, and there are a lot of primary sources for this subject. For instance, there are very detailed minutes of all the meetings that occurred at Casablanca. There are detailed minutes for meetings for the year before in preparation for that, where unconditional surrender was discussed repeatedly. And um, Roosevelt knew all about all that stuff. He claimed at the news conference that it literally just popped into his head because he had been talking about Generals Lee and Grant. He got off on a tangent and said that that just popped into his head. Well, that was ridiculous, and nobody believes that. But the controversy is over why did he do that? And so my conclusions are that he did that for a number of reasons, but for this paper, I looked at a couple of the biggies. And one was that he did it there so that he could trap Churchill into agreeing with it. He did it in that public venue so that the Allied forces couldn't take it back later because it would make them look very weak if they demanded it and then said, "Oh, don't worry, forget about that." But more importantly, he did it for political reasons. And one was to mollify Stalin. Roosevelt had a very odd need to placate Stalin. And Stalin was very upset because the Allies had not opened a front on mainland Europe yet at this point. And so, but Roosevelt also wanted to placate his domestic political base. The midterm elections in 1942 had just occurred, and it didn't go well for the Democrats. And then when the American forces invaded northern Africa about a month and a half before the Casablanca conference, Roosevelt and Eisenhower worked with a Vichy French commander to stand the Vichy French forces down. There was still a lot of fighting, but by doing that, it saved thousands of lives. Well, his domestic political people didn't like him. It's kind of like Antifa today. How dare you work with a fascist? And so that was a huge problem. Secondarily, his administration was rife with Soviet agents who were on Stalin's payroll, and also just Sovietophiles who um, just wanted to do Stalin's bidding. So, looking for this in the future in my dissertation, I'm going to look at a lot more of those reasons behind that. There are numerous more, but also what were the ramifications of this? And that's the most important thing, because if we just discussed it, it cost millions of lives to demand unconditional surrender. So basically, when you get down to it, um, Roosevelt felt it was worth trading all the costs of a year of war and millions of lives in order to mollify American Democrats and a Soviet tyrant. Thank you.